when Russia deployed the nuclear-capable Oreshnik hypersonic missile system to Belarus in mid-December 2025. Moscow was not chasing headlines, nor was it responding impulsively to battlefield noise. The move was deliberate, timed, and structurally coherent, a calculated adjustment of geometry on the European security map. Confirmed by Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko on December 18th, with missiles arriving the previous day and immediately entering combat duty, the deployment fulfilled a pledge made earlier by President Vladimir Putin. Oreshnik was no longer a test platform. It was no longer an abstract threat discussed in briefings. It had crossed the threshold into operational reality. And that distinction matters, because once a system enters combat duty, it stops being a message and starts being a constraint. Before examining why Belarus was chosen and what this means strategically, it is necessary to understand what Oreshnik actually is and why it has unsettled planners across NATO capitals. Oreshnik exists because a gap exists. After the collapse of the INF Treaty, Russia lost an entire category of intermediate-range deterrence that once structured stability across Europe. Oreshnik is Moscow's answer to that absence. Derived from the RS-26 Rubej solid propellant platform, it occupies the 700 to 5,500 kilometer range bracket, placing virtually all of Europe, parts of North Africa, and the Middle East within reach when launched from Belarusian territory. But range alone is not what makes Oreshnik disruptive. The missile carries a payload of roughly 1.5 tons and is capable of deploying multiple independently targetable re-entry vehicles. 3 to 6 warheads can be released from a single booster, each following a maneuverable hypersonic glide path at terminal speeds estimated between Mach 10 and Mach 11. At those velocities, interception windows collapse. Reaction time becomes theoretical rather than practical. Western systems like Patriot were designed to manage predictable ballistic arcs or slower cruise profiles. Oreshnik does neither. Its trajectory is variable. Its terminal phase is chaotic by design. During its first known combat use against Ukraine's Dnipro facility in November 2024, the strike demonstrated destructive effects comparable to nuclear yields while remaining fully conventional. That dual-capable flexibility is the point. Oreshnik does not force Russia to choose escalation ladders. It allows Moscow to hold them simultaneously. Yet capability alone does not explain deployment. Context does. Belarus is not a random choice. It is Russia's closest military ally, bound through the Union State framework that has been deepening for 3 decades. More importantly, it is geography weaponized. From Belarus, Oreshnik compresses distance. Targets that once required forward basing or extended flight profiles now fall within immediate reach. Reaction timelines for NATO shrink dramatically, especially across Poland, Germany, and the Baltic corridor. The timing of the deployment is equally deliberate. Plans surfaced publicly in October 2025, with Lukashenko announcing December readiness during joint exercises. Putin reiterated the timeline on December 17th during a military meeting, explicitly linking it to the Zapad 2025 drills, which included simulated Oreshnik launches. When the missiles arrived on December 17th and entered combat duty, the choreography was complete. This coincided with stalled Ukraine peace talks promoted by US President Donald Trump. Moscow had already signaled that unresolved demands would lead to expanded territorial and military measures. Oreshnik's arrival in Belarus sharpened that signal without firing a single shot. Leverage does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it simply takes position. With the hardware in place, the next layer becomes strategic intent. From Moscow's perspective, the deployment is defensive but not passive. Russia views Eastern Europe as an increasingly militarized NATO fortress. Forward troop concentrations, missile defense installations, and long-range strike systems positioned in Ukraine and Germany are seen as direct threats to Russian depth and survivability. Oreshnik reintroduces balance by restoring intermediate-range parity that NATO planners had grown accustomed to operating without. Lukashenko's phrasing was revealing. He described the system as a means to strike if the situation becomes severe, emphasizing that conventional strikes could deliver effects comparable to nuclear use. This matters because it reinforces Russia's doctrine of deterrence without lowering its nuclear threshold. In other words, escalation is controlled, not automatic. Production numbers further underline this logic. Oreshnik is not being mass-produced in 2025. Only a limited number of units are operational, with scaling expected in 2026. This is not a saturation weapon. It is a high-value asset designed to impose psychological and planning costs far beyond its physical count. A few missiles, correctly positioned, can force dozens of defense systems into redundancy. Naturally, this recalibration has not gone unnoticed. Ukraine was the first to react publicly, and it did so not with confidence, but with urgency. President Volodymyr Zelensky claimed that Kyiv had identified the coordinates of Oreshnik deployment sites near Poland, immediately calling for sanctions on suppliers and international pressure to force a repositioning. The speed of the response mattered more than its substance. It revealed anxiety, not preparation. Poland followed suit by activating air defense systems and intensifying drills around the Suwalki Gap alongside Lithuania. These moves were framed as precautionary, yet their timing told a different story. They were reactive. Germany and NATO officials soon admitted, with unusual candor, that existing missile defense networks struggle against hypersonic threats, especially those launched from forward positions such as Belarus. At that moment, the language shifted. What had long been described as deterrence quietly became vulnerability. Across Washington and Brussels, calls emerged for accelerated missile shield upgrades and emergency funding packages. Yet behind closed doors, analysts acknowledged a harder reality. Interceptors capable of reliably countering maneuverable hypersonic vehicles remain years away from operational relevance. The gap is not political, it is technological. Pro-Russian outlets did not need to exaggerate this contradiction. They simply highlighted it. Western capitals were demanding solutions to a problem that already existed, not one that might emerge in the future. The reaction itself became confirmation of Moscow's strategic logic rather than a rebuttal to it. So, what are your thoughts on this? Share it below. Until then, thanks for watching.